So for this video, I want to talk about great bands that have no great albums. And what I mean by that, and of course, this is all subjective, like this is just all my personal opinion. If you love albums by these bands, that's perfectly fine. But in my opinions, the bands I'm going to talk about today don't really have any great albums. They're not albums that I would listen to from start to finish. Most of these bands I would just consider, like having their greatest hits. Like they probably have a lot of great songs, but I would just be fine with like a greatest hits CD or playlist. I don't really have any albums by them that I can just listen from start to finish and think like, man, that's a great album. So yeah, that's what these bands are today. Of course, if you disagree with me, let me know down in the comments below and let me know which albums of them I should check out and which one of them are your favorites. But anyway, I'm just going to jump right into it, so let's go. All right, so I think I have about 10 bands here to talk about. I'm not going to do this in any kind of order. They're just going to be random bands and artists that I think of. The first one that usually comes to mind for me is Aerosmith. Aerosmith has a lot of great songs, but looking at their albums, like each album really has like two or three, maybe four or five, like really good songs on them. But the deep cuts, I'm not as thrilled with as, like their standout songs. So looking back on their albums from like the 70s and the 80s, like I said, each one of those albums has really great songs, but then you go into the deep cuts and I'm just not as big a fan of them. I mean, probably their best album would be like Toys in the Attic, which of course has mega hits like Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, and then it has a couple of other good songs, but overall, it's still not an album that I would love to listen to from start to finish. Same thing with really any of their 70s or 80s albums. Yeah, they're just a band that I would just be happy having their greatest hits, and they have a lot of really good songs because they had songs, that were great in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So, really long time band that over the years have compiled a really great like set list of songs, but I'm not a big a fan of their deep cuts. Now, if you disagree with me, let me know which Aerosmith album I should check out. But overall, I would just be happy having their greatest hits. The next band that comes to mind is The Police. The Police really only have 5 albums, so there's not really a lot to choose from. But from those 5 albums, we do get a lot of really cool songs. But like with Aerosmith, just listening to them from start to finish, there might be like a deep cut here and there that I enjoy, but overall, their albums from start to finish just aren't my favorite. But they do have a lot of great songs. And again, I would be very happy just having their greatest hits album, if I could speak. But if you disagree with me, let me know which of their albums I should check out. I think I've listened to all of them, but maybe I can give them another re-listen, see if I can get more into them. But basically, their greatest hits, just make a playlist of maybe like 15 or 20 songs. I'd be happy with just having that. And another band pretty similar to this is Foreigner. I've actually seen Foreigner live twice, and funnily enough, they played the same set list every time. They basically just played their hits, which I'm fine with. There are a couple of deep cuts, especially on their earlier albums, that are really good. But overall, I'm just happy having their greatest hits and just listening to those. They're very good. Some of, classic rock staples. But I've tried getting into their albums, and they're not the best. I don't like to say that any songs are filler because I just think that's a lazy review tactic. Like, it's filler only if you don't like it. Like, so there's probably, people out there that love all of the Foreigner albums and they love all of their songs and they would be offended by songs being called filler. So yeah, I don't usually like to call songs that I don't like filler. But yeah, Foreigner has a lot of great songs, but their deep cuts aren't my favorite. So I'd just be happy having their greatest hits. And another another band that's similar to this would definitely be Disturbed. They have, I don't even know, like 7 or 8 albums now. I mainly like their first 4 to 5 albums. That's where a lot of their great stuff is lately just all of their albums are just starting to sound very samey and very formulaic. So really listening to their albums from start to finish, you're just like, I've heard this all before. But that being said, having like their greatest, like 15 or 20 songs and maybe a few deep cuts here and there, fantastic. They're one of my favorite bands. I would definitely put them in my top 50 somewhere. But that being said, there's not really any of their albums like from start to finish that I would love and just put on like the upper echelon of like my favorite albums of all time. I would just much prefer to have their like big mega hits. And yeah, they're a great band, but their deep cuts can kind of be hit or miss for me. Another band, this might be an unpopular opinion. I mean, probably a lot of this is unpopular, but the Rolling Stones, they've been a band for a long, long time. So they have probably like 25, 30 or more like great songs. But every time I try to go listen to one of their albums, I just can't get into it. And of course, all of their albums have usually like 1, 2, or 3 really good, really well-known songs that are really good, classics. But then the rest of the album, I just can't get into. And they have a lot of albums like that. So their songs, add up. So like if you were to go to a concert, like it would be hit after hit after hit after hit. But the deep cuts just don't do it for me. And when I say deep cuts, that usually means like songs that they don't play on the radio, that aren't like concert staples, that aren't, they're not fan favorites, but like really big fans of the bands know these songs. And, bands that I love, like Led Zeppelin, Steely Dan, Pink Floyd, I love all of their deep cuts. But for these bands, not so much. And Rolling Stones is no exception. Rolling Stones, basically, I would just be happy having a giant playlist of all of their hits. And another band similar to all of these bands is Steve Miller Band. They have probably like 10 or 15 songs that are just really good that I love. But again, going and listening to, their 70s stuff and late 60s stuff, it just doesn't grab my attention like their big hits do. But yeah, I don't really have too much to say about that, but I do, like I said, I do love their hits, and I would just be happy and content with having their like 15 like best known songs. Another artist is Phil Collins. I'll be honest though, I haven't given him too much attention, and I know like I've had his greatest hits CD before, and I've been perfectly content with that. So this one would be an artist that I'd be willing to give a try, like listen to, because he's got a lot of albums, a lot of solo albums in the 80s, that is. I've listened to Genesis albums, and there are some albums, that are really good. You can listen to from start to finish. But I haven't really given Phil Collins a fair shot. He has a lot of really good songs, but I don't really know too much about his deep cuts. I would be willing to give him a try, but if I never went and like listened to Phil Collins, like I would still be content with just his greatest hits. Another one that I would be willing to give a shot is Tom Petty. And Tom Petty has like, I don't know, 25 or 30 songs, very similar to Rolling Stones, where he's just put out so much stuff, and like every album has like 2 or 3 or 4 really good songs. I'm just not very familiar with the deep cuts, but like his songs that I do know, I love so much, and Tom Petty is definitely one of my favorites. So I probably should check him out more. I think I've listened to a couple of his albums, and I've definitely felt very similar to the rest of these artists that I'm mentioning, where it's just his deep cuts just don't hit the same way, like he has so many great songs, but I don't know. I would be willing to give him a shot though, just like Phil Collins. Another artist is Alice Cooper. Same thing with all these bands. I would be very content with just listening to his greatest hits. I've listened to a few of his albums before, very hit or miss with the deep cuts. Sometimes you find a really good one. Sometimes they're kind of forgettable or just like, what the hell is that? But, you know, Alice Cooper does have a lot of great songs, so I would be content with just his greatest hits. And then the last band I'll mention here is Foo Fighters. Now, they've been racking up some albums. They've been a band since 1995. I believe probably they have like 10 or more albums, and of course, each one of those albums has a lot of great songs. But I've tried to listen to some of the earlier stuff, and the deep cuts, like with a lot of these bands, are kind of hit or miss. They're either forgettable or I just don't love them nearly as much as their like mega hits. So I would be perfectly fine with only having the Foo Fighters greatest hits. And yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Like all of these bands that I'm mentioning, I would just be perfectly content with like a greatest hits CD or playlist. And if I didn't really listen to any of their deep cuts, I would be fine, really. But definitely let me know if y'all disagree with any of these artists that I'm mentioning here. And if you do, name your favorite album by these artists, and I'll try to check them out. And then also, do you have any bands that you feel this way similarly to? You know, like some of my favorite bands are like Led Zeppelin, Steely Dan, Pink Floyd. Do you feel similarly about those bands? You know, like, is there, like, Led Zeppelin, are you content with just their greatest hits? Or, you know, other bands like Leonard Skinner or Black Sabbath, you know, like, what are some bands that you're content with just listening to their greatest hits? I want to know down in the comments below. And of course, thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe and all that jazz, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.